Welcome to Home Cooked Stories, the podcast that brings flavor and inspiration to your ears. I'm your host, Julia Darling, a working mother with a family of 5 to feed and an insatiable appetite for all things food. Inspired by the life lessons from my mom, I believe food has profound links to our lives, from family recipes that leave a legacy, to the culinary journeys that define our travels, and the food that shapes our culture and lifestyle. Join me on this audio adventure as we dig into delicious topics, bringing more meaning and connectivity to our lives. And yes, we'll definitely work up an appetite. Remember, food isn't just what's on your plate. It helps tell the story of who you are. So wherever you are in this moment, pull up a seat and tune in, because life's too short for bland stories and boring meals. Welcome to Home Cooked Stories. Hello, my lovely listeners, and welcome to episode 4 of Home Cooked Stories. Well, fasten those seatbelts because today I am taking you on the road to a land brimming with sandy beaches and rocky cliffs overlooking the Casco Bay. There's iconic ferry boats and lighthouses, not to mention a food scene to write home about. I'm taking you to Portland, Maine today. Now, I love to travel, and one of the reasons why is because it's an opportunity to not only explore a town's food scene, but to also get a sense for their community and for their culture. And I laugh at myself because it seems like such a boring answer, but it is true that when people ask me, what do you and Stuart like to do when you travel? My first response is always, we like to go and eat. And that's often how we choose our places to visit, or at least compile our bucket list of where we want to vacation. And now, granted, with kids in tow, the criteria has changed to include things like what recreational activities do they have? Can we go hiking or go to the beach or bike riding? Or what cultural activities do they have by way of museums and art and history? But regardless, I am a self-proclaimed foodie as well as a parent. And so when we are finding places to go on vacation as a family, I'm really looking for trips where I can get my kicks on enjoying good food while also blending in some family fun. And that's really why I wanted to share details around our Portland trip with you today, because it truly is one of those towns that has the ideal balance between having activities that the whole family will enjoy, as well as a food scene that adults would seek out on their own, but kids will also drool over. So whether you're going solo, as a couple, maybe with some friends, or as a family, get ready to take some notes, because I am about to give you the download on where we ate, stayed, and played in Portland, Maine. All right, well, the first thing I wanted to do was give you a little bit of background and the story behind this trip to Portland, Maine. Now, Portland has been on our personal bucket list for quite a few years. I've gone as far up on the Northeast coast as Boston, but have always wanted to go to Maine and just had this very picturesque view of the state in my mind of pine trees and flannel and blue water and rocky cliffs and lighthouses. And I wanted to go and experience that firsthand. This trip was originally planned as a week-long summer vacation last year. And as our misfortune would have it, the week before we were supposed to leave, my mom went into hospice care. And so we were kind of teetering on, oof, is this trip going to happen? Is it not? And then unfortunately, her funeral wound up being the day that we were supposed to fly out to Maine. So we canceled the trip. But after a couple weeks, we started to think about, should we pivot and still take the trip at some point this year? Now, when you're kind of going through this intense state of grief, being able to mentally and physically take a step outside of the four walls of your home and to be able to get away as a family and have that time together to laugh and have some fun and make some new memories together, I think was really essential and something that we needed. So we took the trip to Maine for fall break last year instead, which truly ended up being quite an ideal time to visit. The temperatures were lovely. I mean, we were in the 50s and 60s during the day. Mornings were a little chilly in the 40s, which to me as a Southern girl, 40s is chilly. So we packed our coats and we had, our hats. But as the temperatures warmed up in the afternoon and the sun came out, we would shed those outer layers, and it was just a beautiful time to be able to spend outside all day. And of course, yes, we were able to enjoy all of the colors and the changing of the leaves in Maine. It was just quite picturesque. We also had the benefit of not being inundated with swarms of tourists, which, as I understand, in the summertime, it can get quite crowded. But we really had no crowds at all at the time that we were visiting, which was quite nice because you felt more like a local in that space as we were visiting. Now, I think where we stayed also attributed to the success of our trip. We landed on a place called the Docent Collection, and that's Docent, the Docent Collection. It's an old port, kind of in that historic waterfront downtown area of Portland. And the Docent Collection is a collection of private lofts, more or less for hotel travelers. So while there was a hotel manager or a staff on hand if you needed them, it otherwise was like living in a loft apartment for the 4 nights that we were there. And it was perfectly situated several blocks away from the main waterfront, which is where you might have a lot of the ferry boats or the cruise liners that would be there. So you still had access to all of those things, but it was tucked away a couple blocks. So you didn't feel like you were right on top of the tourist areas. And in that setup, being a family of 5, we had 2 bedrooms and there was 1.5 baths, as well as a kitchen and a seating area. So it really set us up well for the weekend of being able to wake up and have coffee in the morning, or the kids could have juice and a light breakfast to hold them over as we were all getting dressed and ready for the day. There was also in the living room, the couch could convert into a pull-out bed. So 2 of the kids bunked up in a room together while the other one slept on the pull-out mattress in the living room. Some of the shops or the restaurants that we wanted to visit were between a 5 and a 15-minute walk away. So as you stepped outside your door, the access to both the historic Old Port waterfront, as well as being able to get up to neighborhoods like Munjoy Hill, was really ideal. Now that we're settled in, let's go and explore the town. All right, so more or less, our fall break trip to Portland consisted of really 3 full days, a full weekend of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We arrived in Portland around lunchtime on a Thursday, and then we left to head back home to North Carolina on a Monday afternoon. And when we arrived at the Docent Collection on that Thursday afternoon, it was around lunchtime. And Stuart and I both knew, as those with children do, from the time we landed, the kids would be a ticking time bomb before the hangry feelings came out. Lucky for us, one of the restaurants on our list of places to try was a stone's throw away from the hotel. And after getting our bags in the loft, we walked 4 minutes to Duck Fat. Now, whenever anyone talks about Duck Fat, they mention French fries, specifically Belgian frites, and milkshakes. And that's really all I needed to know about Duck Fat to make the decision that we are going here first and foremost. They had me at Belgian frites. As a kid who spent 4 years growing up in Brussels, Belgium, I was dying to try them at Duck Fat. And what makes frites different from American fries is a couple things. Primarily, they're thicker cut. There's a double frying technique, and the use of beef tallow or duck fat for cooking the French fries is how they're different. And so they have this delightfully crisp exterior and a tender and flavorful interior. And I love to dip them in mayonnaise. I know, don't cringe, but most Europeans eat their fries with mayonnaise instead of ketchup. So don't knock it until you've tried it. And the milkshakes at Duck Fat were truly some of the best I have ever had. And I didn't even have to order my own because each of the kids got a different flavor. So we had the benefit of getting to sample 3 flavors. The Maine blueberry buttermilk was probably my favorite, and my second favorite was the cookies and cream. The poutine that they served was also out of this world delish. So my point in all of this being, Duck Fat was really a great place to start the trip and cemented in my mind why we wanted to come to Portland in the first place. Later that evening, we took a 10-minute walk over to Munjoy Hill. Munjoy Hill is a historic neighborhood located east of downtown Portland, and we headed over there specifically to Fort Sumner Park to watch the sunset. This spot had great panoramic views of the city. It overlooked the bay and the rooftops of a lot of the homes on that side of town. And it felt more like a local neighborhood spot. So we weren't competing with a lot of tourists to snag a primetime seat on a bench to watch the sunset. This also was a great photo op as we kicked off the trip. So while I just mentioned that there weren't a lot of tourists there, we were certainly the obvious tourists in this group because we couldn't help pulling out our phones and snapping at least a dozen pictures of ourselves and the kids. So that wrapped up our first night. And you guys, this trip to Portland was nothing if not indulgent because on our first full day in Portland, we walked ourselves back over to Munjoy Hill to a place called Belleville. Now, Belleville, has received a lot of hype for their French pastries, so yours truly had to go. I also love a little bit of their background story. It is owned by a couple where the wife is originally from Maine. And when they got married, they moved to France to learn and work in French bakeries before moving back to Maine to open up their own bakery. And man, did their French training pay off because Belleville delivered some amazing almond croissants and some ham and cheese croissants that we got to enjoy. But the space itself isn't conducive to seating large groups, so there's no tables and chairs that you can sit as a group. But there are two countertops that are along the walls of the building with some high top stools. So we were able to grab 3 stools at the countertop. So each of the kids got a seat, and then Stuart and I stood behind them to chomp away at our croissants. But don't worry, because if there isn't enough room to stay and sit at Belleville, grab your breakfast to go. And I would recommend heading over to the East Promenade. Now, it's just a few minutes further up the road, and that's what we did while we enjoyed our croissants at the bakery. We took our coffees and what we had left over to go and walked over to the East Promenade because they also had a playground. So we took them over to the park to run off that energy. And then there's a beautiful trail that more or less kind of loops around the waterfront of town. Ultimately, we walked all along that trail until it spit us back out near Old Port and where our hotel was. And on our way back to the loft, we had a short window of time to grab lunch before heading out onto the Casco Bay. And we thought it would be a good idea to let everyone take a break and kind of get their second wind. So we pulled into Migucci grocery store. And it's an Italian market that sells imported goods and very good square Sicilian pizza slabs. You can just walk in the door and follow your nose to the back of the store where they have a pickup window to grab your slice and go. And so that's what we did. We grabbed some pizza, we went back to the loft, and lunch was devoured from the comfort of our living room before we hopped on board the Casco Bay Island ferry, where our next stop was Peaks Island. Now, if I were to pick a can't miss item on your trip to Portland, I think it would have to be Peaks Island. First of all, it's just a 15-minute ferry ride away from Portland, and the ferry runs every hour, pretty much every hour on the hour. So it's perfect for a day trip. You can spend as much or as little time there as you want, but we thoroughly enjoyed probably the better part of 3 hours on Peaks Island. And we did that. When you get there, there's 2 places that you can rent golf carts from. And so we did. We rented a golf cart and we scooted around the perimeter of the island, kind of bobbing in and out of the neighborhoods. The island is small. It's just 2 miles wide and 1 mile long. So you can really kind of cruise through town in about 15 to 20 minutes on a golf cart or a bike if you wanted. But we took our time, and the fun part really is simply just riding the golf cart, enjoying the views. You're feeling the sun and the wind in your face. We're drooling over the homes perched alongside the cliffs. And then there's several beach and picnic areas where you can pull over and look out over the cliffs. So plenty of opportunity to build rock towers and look out on the water. And honestly, you guys, I specifically remember a moment where we're sitting on the beach and I just thought, man, like someday I am going to move to Peaks Island for a summer and I'm going to live my best Nancy Meyers rom-com life. Like this is where it's at. Now, given the time of year that we were there, most of the restaurants on the island had closed for the season. So we didn't get to enjoy some of the restaurants that might be available in the summer, but we did get to enjoy ice cream before we got back on the ferry at a place called Downfront. So we grabbed our ice cream and really took in those last views of the island before getting on our ferry back to Portland. So what happened for dinner that Friday night was both a real restaurant challenge as well as a food win with the kids. And thank goodness we started on the challenging note and ended with a win. But we didn't have reservations. We didn't really have a plan necessarily of where we wanted to go for dinner. And when we plan our vacations, I typically fall in the camp of plan enough so that you have 1 or 2 scheduled activities or particular restaurants that you've made reservations for, but then leave some room to be a little spontaneous and just kind of go with the flow and see how you feel. I've often found that some of my favorite memories or favorite restaurants that we've visited are ones that we've just stumbled upon unplanned. And so we landed on a place called Empire Chinese Kitchen. It was about a 15-minute walk away from our hotel. And we approached the hostess after we arrived to find out that there was a 90-minute wait for a table. Quite the conundrum. There are 3 kids that are hungry, plus 2 adults that are hungry, and a 90-minute wait. And as you looked around on the streets outside, I just thought by the time we decide on where to go next, get there, and then there will also most likely be another wait for a table. That likely could take up the better part of 60 to 90 minutes. So we decided we're going to wait in this tiny entryway of an area in the restaurant. So by the end of that 90 minutes, like the kids were getting somewhere between like slap happy and also ready to smack each other. They were getting so frustrated and so hangry, but we pulled it together. But it was certainly a challenge. But by the time we sat down, it ended up being a great success. The kids loved it. They got to try dumplings and pot stickers. And even my youngest, who was 4 at the time, was attempting to eat with chopsticks and just having the best time. We all loved getting our fortune cookies and sharing them with each other. So that was certainly one of those moments where you think this could turn into an absolute nightmare for a Friday night, but it really ended up being a great success. All right, on day 3, Saturday, now I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever thought about how far you'd make someone walk just to try a James Beard awarded bakery? Well, I now know that my personal answer is 30 minutes because that's how far I dragged Stuart and our kids on a Saturday morning to try a place called Zoo Bakery. And I don't think any of us regret it for a minute, thankfully, because we were double fisting croissants and brioche rolls for breakfast after we got there. Now, a word to the wise, if you want to try Zoo Bakery, get there early. They open at 9 a.m. And I'd say by the time we got there, it was around 10 a.m. and there was already a long line out the door. And by the time we got inside, the pastry counter was pretty much sold out. If I recall correctly, I think we got maybe the last 1 or 2 of the ham and cheese croissants. But the beauty of that unfortunate reality was that I went back inside to order more pastries. And one of the girls working there behind the counter, suggested the orange brioche roll, which was pure bliss. I loved it. I gave each of the kids and Stuart a sample. They loved it so much so that I went back inside to order more and to thank her for her recommendation. So if you go there and they happen to have those orange brioche rolls, I would highly recommend them. But honestly, you cannot go wrong with anything at Zoo Bakery. So the one other thing that I will mention is that the bakery itself is small. There's no seating. Now, we didn't realize that at the time when we showed up. So what we ended up doing was perching ourselves on the sidewalk outside of Zoo Bakery, and we enjoyed our breakfast al fresco, which, you know what? Nobody had a problem with it. It was a beautiful sunny morning, and it was probably a good thing that there was no seating inside because I could have sat there all afternoon, just entranced in the activity of watching the owner of Zoo Bakery, Barack Olin, and his team, and I could have just delighted in watching their craftsmanship the entire afternoon. So following Zoo Bakery, we headed back to the loft for a brief reprieve before jumping aboard a lobster boat. And while Stuart and the kids took some of that time off to kind of rest up and get their second wind, I took myself out for a little mama moment. A friend of mine recommended a bookstore on Washington Street called Rabelais, Rabelais. It's a tiny rectangle of a room that sells new and vintage cookbooks. So as you can imagine, I probably was the only one in my family that would have an interest in going to this cookbook store. And I ended up walking away with a book by John Bunker called Apples and the Art of Detection. And what sold me on this particular book was its connection to Maine. John Bunker is an apple historian in Maine, and he finds and saves heirloom varieties from around the state, and he has his own orchard where he grows them. And so he wrote this book that essentially captures stories and his own illustrations of these apples. So I walked away with something that I could read and be educated on, but also just made for a great coffee table book and a story piece about our travels to Portland. Being quite proud of my souvenir, I headed back to meet up with the family as we embarked on a true lobster excursion. Similar to taking the ferry to Peaks Island, I thought our time with Lucky Catch Cruises was and is a must-do when in Portland. This boat is a commercial lobster boat, It's a family-run business, and the group on board, which I really liked, was quite small. So there was no more, I'd say, than about 15 to 20 of us on this hour-and-a-half tour. Not only was it a joy to be out on the water that afternoon, but we were actively learning and participating in catching lobsters, which was just a thrill. We put on the full-on fisherman garb with our big rubber aprons and rubber gloves, and we would get to do things like put old fish heads and bait bags, and we learned how to tie them around the lobster traps, and we would cast the traps out into the bay, and then we would reel in the other traps to see what we caught. And you'd get to pull the lobsters out of the traps, as well as pull out any of the small crabs that you would catch and throw them back into the sea. And I have to say, like, these suckers are strong with their claws. It was very hard, surprisingly, pry them off of the trap and throw the crabs back in the water. You're also learning how to band the lobster claws together, and you learn how they measure them and how they make this a sustainable seafood practice. And we learned how to tell if it's a male or female lobster and all sorts of things just that were really fascinating. And ultimately, at the end of this trip, you had the option to purchase the lobsters that you caught and take them to the restaurant next door where they'll cook them for you. And so it was just a really all around a super cool experience to go kind of from farm to table or sea to table, if you will, and experience the entire cycle of catching lobsters all the way to enjoying them for a meal. For dinner that evening, we headed back in the general direction of where we were the night before, where we ate at Empire Chinese Kitchen. And we ate at a restaurant called Friends and Family. And this was a great spot. It was casual, family friendly, but equally a good spot to go on for a date. Their menu focuses on pizzas. They have a few salads and a couple small plates, as well as a curated selection of natural wines. So it was just an all-around crowd-pleasing meal. The pizzas were delicious. We were splitting some salads and a couple small plates, and it was really memorable too, because I just remember everyone being in a good mood. The kids were engaging and fully kind of immersed in having conversation with us. No one was running around the table or asking to go to the bathroom a dozen times. So our experience at Friends and Family was an all-around winner. All right, on to Sunday, which was day 4, our last full day in Portland. And we went for breakfast at Tandem Bakery. Now, this place is famous for their coffee, their biscuits, and their pies, and that was certainly evident by the long line of people spilling out the door when we showed up that morning. So again, even though it was not high tourist season, this was certainly a spot where locals are showing up from the time that they open and getting in line. And at Tandem, I ordered their loaded biscuit with butter and strawberry jam. This item is literally on Tandem Bakery's postcard, which I did snag and send to a friend of mine. And I'm not kidding you when I tell you that butter looked a mile high sandwiched in between this biscuit and with that jam. And I just thought, I am absolutely going for it. My arteries may get clogged in the process, but at least I would die a happy woman. After breakfast, fully stuffed and tired, we hopped in a rented car that we got through Turo, and we hit the road to Kennebunkport, which is just 30 to 35 minutes down the road. Now, honestly, our time in Kennebunkport probably could have been better, and I don't think that that has anything to do with Kennebunkport itself. At that point in time, our kids were just truly tired and over it, and their patience was waning thin. And so, those of us that have traveled with young kids before know it is not all sunshine and rainbows every day, all the time. We enjoyed our time at the beach and looking around town, a beautiful lunch on the water, but then we got back in the car, headed back towards Portland. And on the way there, we thought, you know what? It's our last full day. Let's just try our chances, see if we can turn the ship around, figuratively speaking, in all of our attitudes and mindset. And we decided to head over to Portland Headlight and Fort Williams Park. Portland Headlight is Maine's oldest lighthouse, and it is also the most photographed lighthouse in America. And we had a wonderful time. We really did. Just our moods changed. The lighthouse and the views, truly magnificent. I mean, talking about taking a picture, no filter, no need whatsoever to apply a filter, and your pictures are going to be postcard perfect from every angle. This is your ultimate photo op for a family picture and another must-do item on your trip to Portland, in my opinion. There's a beautiful trail that loops around the cliffside. There's a children's garden. There's a rocky beach called Ship Cove that we spent a lot of time at. And then there's Battery Keys, which our kids loved climbing on top of and all throughout. I was so happy that for our last full day in Portland, we really ended on that high note. So there you have it. Monday was day 5 of our trip, and we had just the better part of the morning in Portland, and it could not have been a better trip, just both in terms of the timing and what we really needed, making those memories together and starting to push ourselves to travel a little bit further. The kids are starting to get older. They can appreciate it more. They have a better tolerance and better stamina. So this was a really great entry point into doing more family vacations like this. If I were to take it all and kind of wrap it up and to hit the highlights for you, there's a couple key things I wanted to circle back on. In terms of best kid-friendly meal, I would recommend duck fat as well as friends and family. For the award of cutest cafe, I would probably give that one to Tandem Bakery. For the most unexpected favorite, there are quite a few, but I think I would land on Peaks Island. Again, I wasn't expecting much from that excursion over to Peaks Island, but if you were to ask any one of our family members, what was your favorite thing we did in Portland? Peaks Island is in everybody's top 3. In terms of the snack MVP, I would give that to Maguchi Grocery. If you go in there, certainly try out the Sicilian pizza, but they also just have a great array of imported Italian goods. And for the final one of, I would travel for this again, I would give that one to Zoo Bakery. While there may not be any seats within that bakery, I would be more than happy to spend an afternoon sitting on that sidewalk outside of their building just to try everything that they had. All right, you guys, so that rounds out the itinerary and the highlights of our Portland trip. I hope you enjoyed learning about it. I hope that perhaps it has motivated you to either make a trip to Portland, Maine yourself, or just to do more traveling in your life and with your family. I know that this particular episode isn't necessarily about cooking within your home, but I am a firm believer that things like travel and spending that time with our family and going on these food adventures together build just as much connectivity and memories in our lives as we continue to grow older. If you have been to Portland before or you plan to, send me your favorite eats or the questions that you have. I'd love to hear from you and even share them in a future episode. As you embark upon this summer break, and oh my goodness, I can't believe we are about a week away until the kids are officially off of school, I hope you have a wonderful start to your summer. I hope that there are some good, fun plans in store for you. And until next time, eat well. Thank you all for listening to the episode today. If you find value in these stories, please share it with someone who would appreciate it too. A big part of why I wanted to start this podcast is to build a community of food lovers and home cooks alike. You taking less than a minute out of your day to share an episode, subscribe to the podcast, or leave a review is the greatest form of validation and means so much because it is helping us to build that community and connection with one another. Remember, a good story is meant to be shared. Until next time, eat well.